The cameras were rolling at the Family Feud studio in Atlanta on what seemed like any other Tuesday afternoon in March 2024. The familiar bright lights illuminated the iconic set, and Steve Harvey was in his signature suit, ready to guide another episode of America's favorite game show. The energy was electric as always, with two families eager to compete for the grand prize. On one side stood the Willis family from small-town Kentucky, and on the other, the Thompson family from Florida. The audience was buzzing with anticipation, and Steve was doing what he did best, warming up the crowd with his infectious humor and trademark expressions. Everything was proceeding exactly as expected, until one moment changed the entire trajectory of the show. The Willis family had been holding their own against the Thompsons, trading points back and forth in what was shaping up to be a competitive match. Steve was enjoying the banter, the families were playing well, and the studio audience was engaged and entertained. It was the kind of episode that would make for great television, filled with laughter, friendly competition, and those moments that make Family Feud a beloved staple of American entertainment. Rachel Willis, just 22 years old, stepped up to the podium during what should have been a routine round. She was the youngest member of her family team, with shoulder-length brown hair and a nervous but determined smile. Her grandmother had nudged her forward, whispering encouragement as Rachel took her place behind the buzzer. The studio lights seemed brighter from this angle, and she could feel the weight of the cameras focusing on her. Steve looked at his card and grinned, expecting this to be one of those light-hearted questions that would get the audience chuckling. He had no idea that he was about to witness something that would fundamentally change how he viewed his role as a television host. The questions seemed innocent enough, the kind that typically generated predictable, family-friendly answers that fit perfectly within the show's wholesome format. "We surveyed 100 people," Steve announced with his characteristic enthusiasm, his voice carrying clearly through the studio. "Top 5 answers are on the board. Here's your question, Rachel." He paused for dramatic effect, as he had done thousands of times before. "Name something a parent does to make sure their child feels loved every single day." The studio audience settled in, anticipating the usual responses. Hugs, bedtime stories, cooking favorite meals, saying "I love you." These were the answers that typically populated the board for questions like this. Steve was already preparing one of his playful reactions, perhaps a joke about his own parenting experiences or a comment about the generation gap. The question seemed designed to elicit warm, fuzzy responses that would make viewers at home smile and nod in recognition. Rachel stared at the question board for what felt like an eternity. Her family members behind her were offering quiet encouragement, and she could hear her grandmother's gentle voice saying, "You got this, honey." The Thompson family watched respectfully, waiting for their turn. But something was happening in Rachel's mind that no one in the studio could see or understand. The question had triggered something deep and painful within her. Standing under those bright lights, with cameras recording every moment, Rachel found herself transported back to memories she usually kept buried during the day. Memories that only surfaced in the quiet darkness of her small apartment after her daughter had fallen asleep. When Rachel finally spoke, her voice was steady but quiet, carrying an emotional weight that immediately shifted the atmosphere in the room. "I read to my daughter every night, even when I'm exhausted from working 3 jobs, because I want her to know that no matter how hard life gets, she's still the most important thing in my world." The studio fell completely silent. Steve's prepared joke died on his lips as he processed what he had just heard. This wasn't the typical Family Feud answer he was expecting. There was something in Rachel's voice, something in the way she had phrased her response, that told him this was about much more than just playing a game show. Steve set down his cards and took a step closer to Rachel's podium. His demeanor shifted from game show host to something more personal, more genuine. "Rachel," he said gently, "that's a beautiful answer, but it sounds like there's a story behind it. You want to tell us what's really going on?" Rachel's eyes began to fill with tears, but she maintained her composure. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every nuance of this unexpected moment. The studio audience seemed to sense that something significant was happening, and a respectful hush fell over the room. "I became a mom when I was 19, Rachel began, her voice trembling slightly. "My daughter Lily is 3 now, and her father. He left when she was just 8 months old. Said he wasn't ready to be a dad, that he needed to find himself." She paused, wiping away a tear that had escaped despite her efforts to stay strong. Steve nodded encouragingly, his years of experience in television telling him that this was a moment that demanded patience and genuine human connection rather than entertainment value. The production team in the control room was frantically trying to figure out how to handle this departure from the show's normal format, but Steve's instincts as a person were overriding his obligations as a host. "I work at a diner during the day, clean offices at night, and do freelance data entry on weekends," Rachel continued, her voice growing stronger as she shared her story. "Some days I'm so tired I can barely keep my eyes open, but I promised myself that no matter what, Lily would never doubt that she's loved. So every single night, even if I get home at midnight, I wake her up gently and read her a story." The silence in the studio was profound. Even the usually chatty audience members were completely still, hanging on every word. Steve felt his own eyes beginning to water as he recognized the depth of sacrifice and love in this young woman's daily routine. "Rachel," Steve said, his voice softer than anyone in the studio had ever heard it. "How old did you say you were?" 22, Mr. Harvey. Steve shook his head in amazement. 22 years old, working 3 jobs, raising a daughter on your own, and you're worried about whether you're doing enough to show her love?" He looked out at the audience, then back at Rachel. "Baby girl, you're doing more than enough. You're doing everything." Rachel broke down then, the weight of months of trying to stay strong finally overwhelming her. "But what if it's not enough?" she sobbed. "What if she grows up and resents me for all the times I was too tired to play? Or for the fact that we live in a tiny apartment instead of a house with a yard? Or because I can't afford to buy her the toys her friends have?" Steve Harvey made a decision in that moment that went against every television protocol he had ever learned. He walked around the podium and put his arm around Rachel's shoulders, offering her the kind of fatherly comfort that couldn't be scripted or rehearsed. "Let me tell you something," Steve said, his voice carrying clearly through his microphone to every person in the studio and eventually to millions of viewers at home. "I've been in this business for over 30 years. I've met celebrities, politicians, millionaires, and people who seem to have everything. But standing here right now, talking to you, I am looking at one of the most successful people I have ever met." Rachel looked up at him through her tears, confusion evident on her face. "But I'm not successful. I can barely pay my bills. I drive a car that breaks down every other week. I haven't been able to buy new clothes for myself in over a year because everything goes to Lily's needs." "Rachel," Steve said firmly, "success isn't measured by your bank account or the size of your house. Success is measured by the love you give and the difference you make in someone else's life. Your daughter is going to grow up knowing that she was worth 3 jobs. She's going to grow up knowing that she was worth staying up late for, worth getting up early for, worth every sacrifice you've made." The studio audience began to applaud, but it wasn't the typical game show applause. This was something deeper, more meaningful. People were wiping their eyes, and several audience members were standing up in recognition of Rachel's courage and Steve's compassion. Steve turned to address the audience directly, his years of hosting experience seamlessly blending with his genuine emotion. "How many parents do we have in the audience today?" he asked. Hands went up throughout the studio. "And how many of you have ever questioned whether you were doing enough for your children?" Nearly every hand remained raised. "That's what I thought," Steve said. "Rachel, you are not alone in these feelings. Every parent, whether they're working 1 job or 3, whether they're married or single, whether they're 22 or 42, has moments where they wonder if their love is enough." Steve paused, gathering his thoughts. The cameras continued rolling, but everyone in the studio seemed to have forgotten that this was supposed to be a game show. This had become something else entirely, something more important than entertainment. "Let me tell you about my own story," Steve continued, his voice taking on the tone of someone sharing something deeply personal. I wasn't always Steve Harvey, the TV host. There was a time when I was Steve Harvey, the struggling comedian, sleeping in my car, wondering if I was ever going to be able to provide for my children the way I wanted to. The studio was completely silent except for Steve's voice. Even the production team had stopped their frantic behind-the-scenes activity to listen. I remember calling my kids from payphones because I couldn't afford a cell phone, trying to sound upbeat and successful when I was actually scared and broke. Steve continued, I remember the guilt of missing birthday parties because I was on the road trying to make enough money to pay child support. I remember wondering if my kids would be better off if I just disappeared from their lives entirely. Rachel wiped her eyes, hanging on every word. She had never expected to find such understanding from someone she had only known through television. But you know what I learned? Steve said, looking directly at Rachel. I learned that kids don't need perfect parents. They need present parents. They need parents who show up, who try, who love them enough to keep fighting even when everything seems impossible. Steve reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. Rachel, I want you to give me your number, he said. Not for the show, not for publicity. I want you to have my assistant's direct line. There are resources we can connect you with: financial counseling, childcare assistance, educational opportunities. Nobody should have to carry this load alone. Rachel stared at him in disbelief. Why would you do that for me? You don't even know me. Steve's answer would later be shared millions of times across social media platforms around the world. Because somebody helped me when I needed it most. And because that little girl of yours deserves to have a mama who's not just surviving, but thriving. And because sometimes when you're in a position to help, you help. It's that simple. Steve turned to the Willis family members who had been watching this exchange with tears in their eyes. Come on over here, he called to them. Rachel needs to know she's got a team supporting her. As Rachel's family surrounded her with hugs and words of encouragement, something beautiful began to happen. The Thompson family, who were supposed to be the competition, also stepped forward to offer their support. Soon, both families, Steve and several audience members, had gathered around Rachel in what became an impromptu moment of community support. When Steve finally attempted to return to the game format, the energy in the studio had completely transformed. This was no longer about winning or losing points. This was about human connection and the power of vulnerability to bring people together. You know what? Steve announced to the studio and the cameras. Today we learned something more valuable than any game show prize. We learned what real love looks like, what real sacrifice looks like, and what real strength looks like. Steve made an executive decision that surprised even the production team. Both families are winners today, he declared. Because the Willis family reminded us what it means to love unconditionally, and the Thompson family showed us what it means to support each other, even in competition. Both families received the maximum prize money, but as Steve had said, they had won something much more valuable. They had participated in a moment of genuine human connection that would impact far more people than anyone in that studio could have imagined. When the episode aired 6 weeks later, the response was immediate and overwhelming. The clip of Rachel's story and Steve's response was shared across every social media platform, generating millions of views within hours. But more importantly, it sparked a conversation about single parenthood, about the challenges young mothers face, and about the power of community support. The comment section became a place where thousands of parents shared their own struggles and victories. Messages poured in from single mothers who felt seen and validated by Rachel's courage. Fathers who had walked away from their responsibilities reached out to reconnect with their children. Grandparents offered babysitting services to struggling young parents in their communities. 3 months after the episode aired, Rachel appeared on Steve Harvey's morning show with an update that brought the host to tears once again. The outpouring of support from viewers had been life-changing. Job offers had come in from companies that wanted to support a young mother with Rachel's work ethic and determination. Educational opportunities had been offered, including a scholarship to complete her college degree through online programs. But beyond the practical assistance, it was the emotional support that had transformed Rachel's daily life. I don't wake up every morning feeling like I'm drowning anymore. Rachel told Steve during the interview. "I wake up feeling like I'm part of a community of people who understand what it means to love someone enough to keep going when everything feels impossible." Steve used Rachel's story as inspiration to expand his mentorship programs, specifically focusing on young parents who were trying to build better lives for their families. The Steve Harvey Foundation launched a new initiative called Present Parents, designed to provide both practical and emotional support to mothers and fathers who were struggling to balance work, education, and childcare responsibilities. Rachel's moment on Family Feud proved that sometimes the most powerful television happens when authentic human emotion intersects with the platform to share it. Her willingness to be vulnerable about her struggles gave permission to thousands of other parents to acknowledge their own challenges without shame. The episode became a teaching tool in parenting classes, social work programs, and community support groups. It demonstrated that strength isn't about having everything figured out. It's about showing up consistently for the people who depend on you, even when you're scared, tired, or uncertain. Steve Harvey's response to Rachel showed that having a public platform comes with the opportunity, and perhaps the responsibility, to use that influence for good. His decision to break from the game show format to address Rachel's pain proved that authentic compassion doesn't require preparation or scripting. Rachel's 3-year-old daughter, Lily, who was too young to understand the significance of what had happened, continued to enjoy her nightly story time, unaware that her mother's dedication to that simple ritual had inspired millions of people around the world. As she grew older, she would come to understand that her mother's love had been powerful enough not just to sustain their small family, but to encourage countless other families who were facing similar challenges. The video clip of Rachel's story has now been viewed over 200 million times across all platforms, translated into dozens of languages, and shared in countries around the world. But the real measure of its impact isn't in the view counts or social media shares. It's in the messages that continue to pour in from parents who say that Rachel's courage helped them find the strength to keep going during their darkest moments. Steve Harvey asked a simple question about how parents show love to their children. Rachel Willis gave an answer that revealed the profound truth that love isn't just about the big gestures or expensive gifts. Sometimes the most powerful expression of love is the quiet, consistent choice to keep showing up, day after day, even when you're exhausted, scared, or uncertain about the future. Her answer reminded everyone watching that behind every person trying to make it through the day, there might be a story of incredible courage and sacrifice that we never see. And sometimes, if we're paying attention and willing to respond with compassion, we get the privilege of witnessing that courage and offering the support that can make all the difference. Today, Rachel Willis is thriving in ways she never could have imagined. She completed her college degree in business administration while working part-time at a company that offered flexible scheduling for working parents. She and Lily live in a comfortable apartment with a small yard where Lily can play safely. Most importantly, Rachel has found her confidence as both a professional and a mother. She still reads to Lily every single night, but now it's not because she's worried about proving her love. It's because they both look forward to that special time together, and because Rachel has learned that the rituals of love don't have to be born from fear or guilt. They can simply be expressions of joy and connection. Rachel has become an advocate for young parents, speaking at community events, and working with local organizations to provide support for families facing similar challenges. She often tells audiences that the most important lesson she learned from her experience on Family Feud wasn't about television or fame. It was about the power of telling the truth about your struggles and the amazing things that can happen when people respond with kindness instead of judgment. Steve Harvey continues to host Family Feud, but he approaches his role differently now. He's more attuned to the moments when contestants might be sharing more than just game show answers. He's quicker to recognize when someone needs encouragement rather than entertainment, and he's never forgotten the lesson Rachel taught him about the difference between success and significance. The episode featuring Rachel Willis has become one of the most requested reruns in Family Feud history. New viewers discover it regularly, and it continues to generate conversations about parenthood, community support, and the courage it takes to ask for help when you need it. If Rachel's story of courage and Steve's response of compassion moved you, Remember that there are Rachel Willis stories happening all around us every day. Single parents working multiple jobs to provide for their children. Young mothers and fathers trying to figure out how to be good parents without roadmaps or support systems. People who wake up every day and choose love over fear, hope over despair, and connection over isolation. Rachel Willis went on Family Feud hoping to win some money to help support her daughter. Instead, she won something much more valuable: the knowledge that her story mattered, that her struggles were seen and acknowledged, and that love really is enough, even when it doesn't feel like it in the moment. Steve Harvey thought he was just asking another game show question. Instead, he learned that the most important conversations we can have are the ones where we remind each other that we're not alone, that our efforts matter, and that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is simply keep going when everything in us wants to give up. Rachel's courage to share her truth created a ripple effect that continues to impact families around the world, proving that vulnerability, when met with compassion, has the power to heal not just individuals, but entire communities of people who thought they were facing their struggles alone.